Welcome, pastors and ministry leaders. This is our first just Facebook video, just to help us out in the ministry, and just to be able to work through things. Now, some of these questions that we've had have come through the Grace for the Broken, Preventing Ministry Burnout virtual summit, and a few of the questions that we have specifically in regards to stress. How do we deal with stress? How do we get out of bed when we're so stressed and our energy is just completely depleted? How do we not take it home with us? So that's exactly what we're going to look at and we're going to talk about today. We have Dr. Jim Meyer, and Dr. Meyer was one of the speakers at our Grace for the Broken, and he spoke on compassion fatigue, but also if you purchase the All Access Pass, passion fatigue as well. And Dr. Jim Meyer is a personal friend of mine, and also a mentor and a counselor of pastors, as well as serving as a pastor himself here in the Poconos of Pennsylvania, and formerly had taught at Cairn University in the counseling department. Dr. Meyer, thank you so much again for being with us today, and just to be able to share some of your wisdom.
Fred, it's definitely a pleasure to be able to do so, and want to encourage those of you who are listening. Both Fred and I have experienced significant stress in our lives and truly understand the difficulties that come along with stress. And rather than kind of be so much the experts and say, well, this is what you do or this is what you don't do, really our vision and our desire is to come alongside and share from our hearts how God is at work, even in the midst of very stressful situations. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm thankful for Fred. He's been a great brother in my life, and I've appreciated him greatly and appreciate the opportunities to co-minister with him.
Thanks, Jim. Let's just love fest, hug, brother. Well, when thinking about stress, I got to tell you, I'm a little stressed, so I think I need this myself. I woke up at 2:30 in the morning, and I didn't get back to bed. I didn't get back to sleep last night, and just thinking of all the things that I had to do, thinking about the demand for counseling after COVID, or now that we see the light at the end of the tunnel for COVID, has just increased immensely. We now have waiting lists and things of that nature, and honestly, that's kind of bringing about a level of stress. And so I wake up, and this is one of the things that I do when I get stressed. I wake up in the middle of the night and I start thinking about all of my issues and problems and solutions and developing solutions. And now, of course, I'm pretty tired. But stress really affects us in a lot of different ways. How do you see stress and dealing with people deal with stress? What do you kind of see? What's come across your desk? And let's just talk about what stress is doing to us.
One of the things that I've noticed, particularly, I counsel a number of pastors, and been doing this for many, many years in a ministry called Biblical Counseling Resources. And one of the things that I observe that the ministry has cycles of stress that keep coming back and over, and we're not going to get away from stress. Stress is going to be there. So the question really comes back down to how are we handling it, and in what way are we really creating the space in our life, even as Jesus did, the space in our life to be able to handle those exterior stressors and those internal pressures. To answer your question, Fred, one of the things that I've observed over the years that seems to be consistently there when stress is there is a response of anxiety. So there's this kind of heightened anxiety that happens along with the stress. So the more stress, the more anxiety, and the anxiety keeps building. And that can be very problematic and really a challenge, particularly for those of us who are in ministry, because those anxious contexts can really set us up for more difficult problems. It can lend itself toward real disappointment and real even disillusionment in ministry, and then for some even really struggling with depression. And a lot of times you go back and say, well, what are the triggers? What are the things that really happen to create these kind of difficult situations in our ministry? And you find that they're stressors. There are various stressors that trigger that. And so we have to be aware of that. We have to know how to flag that. We have to know how to then respond in a different way when we're faced with those stressors.
You had talked about cycles, and it's funny that in the pastorate, a lot of those cycles tend to be around seasons. So at the time of this recording, it's Easter, or it's going to be Easter in another week or two, right? So that means there's additional messages, additional sermons that have to be given, additional things that need to be done, whether church activities, Easter egg hunts, whatever you do, and of course Christmas. Then there's several sermons that need to be given around that time, and afterward, it's just kind of like, it's almost like the Monday blahs after you preach on Sunday. It's like, where it's just like, hey, I need a break. And a lot of times we actually not just feel stressed, but depressed. I think often too during those times. When I think of stress and the reasons that we experience stress, I think of the terrible twos. Now, I don't mean the terrible twos in terms of children and teething and at 2 years old, the twos as in TOO, right? There's just too much to do, right? There's too little time. There's too little energy. There's too little support or help from other people. Maybe too many opinions and too many people to make happy, kind of thing. And when there's those terrible twos, we're feeling it. We're feeling the stress. We're feeling all of that anxiety. One of the writers or the people that ask questions, they talked about the effects of stress, what it does to us physically, and what it does to him specifically physically. And he mentioned about cortisol, and not having enough energy even to wake up. Or to get up out of bed, kind of thing. If someone was coming to you for counseling, and that pastor was coming to you, what would you look at? What would you talk to him about? I guess in regards to even just how do you get out of bed and the effects that the stress has been having on him.
Yeah, I would respond with recognizing that there are three, maybe even more, but specifically three components that need to be addressed. The first is the physical. So you want to look at, are there any medical needs? Are there any physiological issues? Are there any neurological, when you mentioned cortisol and the impact that has, particularly how our brain functions. So you want to consider those things. There are many times where I ask those who I'm counseling to make sure that they see a doctor. To get a physical checkup, because there seems to be maybe some aspect of the physiological that needs to be addressed. And so I don't think we want to avoid that. I think that's an essential part of that. The second is the psychological, the emotional realities of the stress, the cognitive responses from the stress. And then the even relational responses we have, those are all within the framework of the psychological world, and really kind of addressing those and unpacking them and having somebody to talk about them. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And you don't have to necessarily go to Fred or myself, but having somebody to unpack that with you. And if you don't, maybe even, recognizing that it may be time to see somebody who has some training in the field of counseling. But the final area is the spiritual. Mm-hmm. One of the things, Fred and I are going to be doing a conference together on burnout. And one of the things that I'll be addressing is where Christ in Luke chapter 4 and verse 16, he withdrew himself often into the wilderness, but he had a very specific spiritual purpose to pray. And it was at the height of the ministry pressures where he just disappeared. And the thing I often point out, and we'll really wrestle with this, that he often did that. In fact, Luke specifies how Christ often did that. And I think that spiritual component of addressing stress is so essential, that we don't just leave it to the physiological, to the psychological, but that we really wrestle with, okay, what is God wanting in this season of my life, and what are the spiritual responses that are necessary in that regard?
Yeah, when I think about the physical, there's a population of people where they autoimmune issues, autoimmune diseases, right? And those individuals, and not just in the congregations, but also, pastors, if you struggle with an autoimmune like Crohn's, Hashimoto's, I always forget the name of that other one that just affects your whole entire body. When dealing with stress and when suffering with stress, like it multiplies things like 100 times, where the whole body ends up being in pain, and it's so difficult to even get up and get out of bed on those situations and those times. And on my research with autoimmune issues, because I have one, I actually have Hashimoto, learning about foods and certain foods that cause inflammation. I mean, that is actually like a huge one. So if you eat or drink certain foods that cause inflammation, I mean, that's just one of those things to kind of look at, because because you want to have anti-inflammatory type foods and drinks and things of that nature. And that's, again, doesn't seem like it's directly related in terms of ministry, but again, we are, our bodies are the temple. We are physical beings, right? And being able to make sure that we do what we can and take care of ourselves. So for that person and those individuals that are just struggling, especially when they're stressed and their whole physical body is doing something. Again, if you aren't seeing a doctor, absolutely go see a doctor and look at what you're eating, look at what you're drinking, but look at your physical activity and things that you're doing too. That's going to be just extremely, extremely important. One of our questions had, or one of the pastors who attended the summit asked the question: how do I not take the ministry stresses home? How do I not take it out on the family? And a lot of us struggle with that, really, because I think as a counselor, as I'm serving as a counselor, there's a part of me that just says, the issues that the people have here, I can leave it here because those are their problems. They're not my problems. But it's different when I serve as a pastor, right? Because I love these people. And I have personally more invested into their lives than just when they come into my office. And that is so true, I think, with so many pastors too. How do you leave it there at the office? How do you not take it home and take it out on your family, those stresses?
And I think that, every individual is different. So one of those, it's one of those you could call trap questions. If you answer it very specifically, it just kind of, misses one person. They say, well, that's not true for me. But I think it's a very valid question. And since it was proposed to us, Fred, I think we really do need to address it. I find that for some pastors, bringing some things home is of great value. Their wives are prayer warriors. Their wives are fellow partners, and it's even good for their kids to see some level of struggle in the ministry. At the same time, that can be very damaging for our children, and sometimes even for our marital relationship. So the context of that is really recognizing that whether we're in pastoral ministry, or whether we're looking at our family, or whether we're looking at various components of life, expect spiritual attack. Mm-hmm. We're going to be under spiritual attack. And so it's really kind of wrestling with, what is of value to bring home and what is inappropriate to bring home, and understanding that the enemy wants to use that as an opportunity. Here's an example, though, of what could be very unhealthy. And that is, a pastor comes home and they decide, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to pretend like there's nothing wrong. But then their spirit is affected. And so their kids are noticing it, their spouse is noticing it, they're a little sharp and short, they're withdrawn, all those different things. And it could be a combination of those things or one or two of them. And my point at that point is you need to stop and say, I have a responsibility here to be husband, dad, and I need to really evaluate how I'm functioning well in my home. I grew up on the mission field, and my parents were missionaries, and so many of my friends had such deep-seated anger and bitterness toward the ministry. Some not toward their parents, but some toward the ministry. And we don't want to, and it's the same with, I've done many counseling of couples in ministry, both missionaries, pastors, and sometimes the bitterness of the spouse is real because there's those components of ministry that haven't been kind of addressed. And I think it's vitally important for us to address it as a spiritual attack and to expect it, and then to consider, okay, what does it really look like to address this in a healthy way, and to resist the devil, resist him that he might flee from us. What does that really look like? What does it mean there in James? And Peter also mentions that aspect of the roaring lion. What does it look like for us to resist? And stress is, to me, one of the ways in which the enemy attacks.
Mm-hmm. When thinking about stress too, it's just, what do we recognize when we're stressed? I guess that might be one of the first questions I kind of look at, right? So when even thinking about not bringing it home, I guess the first question is do you recognize when you're stressed? And even recognizing, like, what do you do when you're stressed? I was actually asking this question to one of my clients the other day, and he answered kind of what he does, and what he does is actually he gets busy because he's a working guy, and he likes to work. And so, when he's stressed, he's feeling the negative feelings, the pain, the hurt, the grief, the feelings that we don't want to feel. What he does is, in dealing with it, is he just does other things and puts around and all that kind of stuff. But he doesn't acknowledge what he's actually feeling. And because he's not acknowledging what he's actually feeling, he's not dealing with it, except he's dealing with it in terms of just doing work. And I think we do that a lot too, don't we? Like, if you, pastor, or if myself or whoever, if you don't recognize what you're feeling and what your emotions are before you even leave to go home, chances are you're going to end up doing something that you've been turning to or wanting to turn to, and you might end up taking out on someone else. And so let's say, for example, if you're like, hey, I just want to veg. All right, now, vegging is the act of getting in front of a TV or a computer and doing nothing and not thinking about ministry, and so instead of being busy, you go to a nothing box and just entertain me, or let me look at something. And then someone interrupts you. And then what? Then you end up taking it out on them because all you want to do is focus on vegging and dealing with it. And then someone else is getting in the way of them dealing with it, right? And when that happens, then again, you're taking it out on your family. So recognizing that, I think, is really important, recognizing the emotions. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jim? And how does one actually do that and recognize what they're actually feeling, even before leaving the office, per se, the church?
And the Garden of Gethsemane is a good example of Jesus not only recognizing it, but then sharing that with his disciples. In Matthew 26, he says, my soul's distressed to the point of death. He told that to his disciples, Peter, James, and John, in that context, in the Garden of Gethsemane. And if you don't mind, Fred, I'm going to take it a little bit different direction. But if we don't identify it and we start moving into a veg kind of state, like we can start looking for what I would call false ways to refresh or false ways to relieve the stress. And that can be very, very dangerous. I think that, when you look at some of the alarming statistics of as high as 50% of pastors struggling with pornography, that would be an illustration of going through to a false well. You're drinking of water that is not going to refresh, but you're drinking of water looking for a temporary relief, and that's really dangerous. And we need to really be willing to address that, and more so. I find that pastors in particular wait way too long to get the help that they need, and we need to address. And I'm not just talking about sexually. I'm talking about punching a wall, those kind of things, physical aggression, those kind of things. Hey, as pastors, one of the things we learn is we're susceptible to a lot of the problems that our congregants face. And we need to be very, very aware of how we are trying to release that stress. And I think that, to me, that ties into what you're saying, identifying. And why do we have to identify? Because if we don't identify it, we may be looking for the wrong kind of relief, the wrong kind of release from the stress. And another way that's very common, I find that it can create arguments with your children, arguments with your spouse. So there's many different ways, from pornography to fighting to aggressiveness to just vegging in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, and I think as you said, talked about arguments, and even just kind of taking that on our family, at some level, anger can be a form of kind of control, right? And we're trying to control our situation, because we might feel that it's out of control. Things have happened that we didn't want to happen. We're having all of these emotions. And so if we can control our world around us or the people around us, then we'll have peace, right? But that doesn't work. And then we feel bad and we feel guilty because then we've sinned against our families. And then, it just puts us in a really tough place with that. So I really appreciate the question from the pastor too, because I think we all have a tendency to do that. And so recognizing I love what you said. I didn't even get that connection right away with the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus just saying that, right? He was told his disciples he's distraught. And so now they weren't really good listeners.
They went to sleep.
They wanted to sleep and such. But God, on the other hand, is a very good listener. And so that might be something to think about. Like if this is where Jesus did, and this is at the Garden of Gethsemane, your drive home or your walk home, if you in a parsonage, it's probably not a very long walk. But the time that you leave the church to go home can be that time of you going to that place, is like recognizing your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts. Where do they come from? What's going on? Being able to bring that to the Lord too, because you're recognizing what's already in, and then you're saying and you're placing on, right? You're placing it on the cross. You're placing it on the altar. You are just saying, okay, Lord, these are your problems. I love these people, but I can't control them. And whatever those emotions are, we need the ministry of Christ and the Holy Spirit inside of our hearts and lives. So one of the things that words that I heard several times throughout the summit was rhythm, getting into a rhythm. And what would you say that there are some certain rhythms that you found healthy or good for either for yourself, or that maybe in your times of counseling that other pastors have shared with you, some good rhythms that help to alleviate or deal with stress?
And again, everyone's different. For me, taking a long walk in prayer is really a vital part of me addressing stress. I find that, and I walk a significant distance every day, and half of it's for prayer and half of it's my wife joins me. So I walk the first like 3 miles with a prayer focus in the last 3 miles with my wife when we can. Not always every day can we do that, but I find that combination of exercise and engaging my mind and my thoughts in prayer has been very, very effective. So there's a combination of things. You were talking about eating right, sleeping, go home, get some rest, Fred. But really having the kind of rhythms that are important. I talk about a number of those rhythms, and that's how we pray, how we sleep, how we eat, how we exercise, how we have fun. I think that's probably one of the areas that we miss in ministry sometimes. That's so important, is just what do you do for fun? What do you what do you just are able to enjoy? And if the ministry is so weighing upon you and so stressful that you've not had any fun, if you can answer this question quickly and easily, then good for you. When was the last time you really had fun? Mm-hmm. If you can answer that like that, that's a good sign. Mm-hmm. But if it takes you a while to say, last time I had fun was, there's something that indicates. Now, not everyone's the same, and for what's fun for you, Fred, might be different for fun for me. But just enjoying what God has given, it's amazing. And for me, spending the few minutes to watch a beautiful sunset or sunrise does wonders. It's just something that's so much fun and so much enjoyment for me. As an example, I'm really big in canoeing, so being in my canoe has a real both benefits. So just finding those things where we're enjoying our spouse, we're enjoying things that we love. That to me is a real key.
And that's your homework, Pastor. If you don't have something that you enjoy doing, and to the point again of having fun, write some things down and do it. Actually, that's my challenge. That's your challenge to me, Jim, is to do that. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to go golfing now. I'm going to take the rest of the day off. We'll talk to you all later. But this is actually fun. I actually find this to be a lot of fun, and it's always fun to talk to you, Jim, and it's always fun to talk ministry with you, and always fun to serve with you. And I'm looking forward to on April 5th to 7th, again, at the time of this recording, it's just before April 5th to 7th at Tuscarora is going to be a ministry retreat for preventing ministry burnout. And Dr. Jim Meyer is going to be speaking on, again, preventing ministry burnout. And but it's going to be time not just simply of a few workshops per se, but it's actually going to be time of rest, where we can do actually that thing called sleep and that thing called rest. I actually saw a t-shirt that said "Jesus took naps, be like Jesus." And I loved it. We need to order that and get that online or something. Maybe that could be our t-shirt for the retreat. But again, thanks so much for coming, and thanks so much for watching, everybody, for pastors. If you have a question and you want us to discuss that, whether it's with Dr. Jim Meyer or another speaker, hey, just go ahead and instant message us. Go ahead and write those questions down if you want to just put on the bottom of this post, again, what some questions might be. And we want to address that at some point for a video on Facebook. So thanks so much for watching. And again, thank you, Jim, for being with us today. And I just wish you all well. God bless.
God bless.